Well, welcome. We welcome you to this 2-on-2 talks. I am Angelle Fouther, and I'm the principal of Kindred Communications. And I am joined by my daughter, Daryn Fouther, who works as an associate for Kindred Communications. She resides in Senegal, Africa, and you'll hear from her later, and she'll introduce our two guests. But I'll start by talking about the purpose of this forum today. This forum is presented by Changing the Narrative. This forum is presented by Changing the Narrative and co-sponsored by Denver Urban Spectrum. And Changing the Narrative is a campaign that's existed since 2018, and the purpose is to dispel the stereotypes and negative perceptions about aging in America, and specifically in Colorado. And so we are going to have a discussion with this dynamic mother and son team to get their perspectives individually and on their work together, and learn a little bit more about intergenerational dynamics and support. And so with that, I'm going to introduce again my daughter, Daryn Fouther, and she'll say a word of greeting and introduce our two guests.
Okay, thank you for introducing me, Mom. And thank you guys for being here. It's a pleasure to see you again, and I hope you're doing well right now. For introductions, we have Dr. Rosemarie Allen, who is the President and CEO for the Institute for Racial Equity and Excellence, and also an assistant professor in the School of Education at Metropolitan State University of Denver. And we also have her son, Kamau Waset, who is a graduate of Howard University and is a community organizer and activist. So thank you guys for being here. And I'll hand it off again to my mom to start us off with the first question.
Sounds good. Thank you, Daryn. So Rosemarie, first question is for you. The question is, how does the way that you've raised and interacted with Kamau, and we know you have an older sister, Kamau, so you can consider that as well. But how does the way that you've raised and interacted with Kamau differ from how your parents raised and interacted with you?
You know, it's really interesting. I decided that I would not raise my children in a climate of fear. I didn't want fear to be in their spirit. And that is different from the way that I was raised, because my grandparents, my mom, they were Black people who fled the terrorism of the South. So they had that fear in their DNA. So everything that I learned was watch out, be careful, this can happen, that can happen. And while I know they did the very best they could do because they loved me and wanted to protect me, that when I became an activist myself in the Black Power movement, I felt constrained by that fear. I did what I felt like I needed to do, but when I look back on the difference between me and my son, my actions were measured. Very measured. I didn't want to disappoint them, but I knew that activism was in my heart. So it was something I had to work around. And I made a very conscious decision that I wanted to raise social justice warriors. And I wanted to make sure they did not have that fear. I wanted them to know that through God, everything was possible. And we know Jesus was a radical, amazing social justice warrior. And I wanted that spirit in my children.
All right, wonderful. And so also for Rosemarie, what is the greatest challenge you see facing young people of color at this time?
Oh, I think picking up that gauntlet and continuing. This movement started many years, generations before, but it seems like right now they have the burden of every generation. What's happening right now seems much more urgent than ever before. So they have the challenge of dealing with a very divisive leadership, We've seen the dynamics between Democrats and Republicans and issues between president and people of color, but I've never seen the vitriol that we're seeing right now. So I believe that our young people are threatened in ways that we weren't. When you look at what's happening in Oregon and now in Washington, D.C., that they are really, protesters are really under attack. Protesters and activists are disappearing in ways that we don't talk about, not just in Oregon, but
Right.
just off the street. When you look at the activists who were in Baltimore and the activists who are in Minneapolis, some of those people have died mysteriously and are gone. So I think the biggest challenge is keeping our people safe, keeping our young people safe, providing a barrier between them, between our young people and them, to make sure we hold them close, but without the fear, but just to be cautious and vigilant in terms of their overall safety and basically their lives.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
And contrary to that, Kamau, what do you think is the greatest challenge you see facing people in your mom's age group at this time?
So I am most worried about, when I think about Black folks in my mother's age group, I'm most worried about the impact that this pandemic has disproportionately on Black folks her age. A lot of Black folks, of course, already disproportionately have underlying health conditions. I know that asthma runs in our family. Other chronic illnesses run in our family. And all of these things are a product of the racist environment that we've grown up in. And due to policies and deregulations on environmental injustice and the ways through which Black communities experienced and held on to trauma has made it so that we're more susceptible to this illness. And I think about who's dying the most from this type of white supremacist neglect. I think about people in my mom's age range. And I know that it's not just Black folks her age, but that's what I'm most worried about. And one of the reasons why I worry is it's not just that this is a loss of community, that we're burying our loved ones, that we are waking up to empty spots at the dinner table. But it's also that during such a radical time, as young people, we need them in our lives right now, as lovers, as supporters, as providers, but also my mom talked about passing on this baton. I think I benefit from knowing that this civil rights movement is occurring so closely in time to the previous one. And what happens when all of our giants are dying? So it's loss on top of loss on top of loss. And it's hard enough to lose the ones you love, but it's even harder when you lose the roadmap to freedom.
Well said.
Thank you. Thank you. And if you could, both Rosemarie and Kamau, could you talk about some ways you all are working to address some of the issues you've discussed?
I'll start. I do a lot of work around equity and equity issues. And when this pandemic started, I thought, oh, this is all going to stop, because at one point I was traveling to a couple of cities a week. And now I find that I'm working more than ever. People are so interested in equitable practices and changing what they're doing and learning more that I become busier than I've ever been. And even with the unusual suspects, the US Customs and Border Control, just big contracts everywhere that people are saying, first, let's facilitate a meeting so that we can hear from Black people what they're experiencing. So I'm finding that I'm facilitating meetings and then conducting equity audits. People who have a goal and mission to include equitable practices, we're going in and assessing their practices, looking at what they're doing to make sure that their actions are aligned with what's on paper. And if not, to create an action plan so that they can actually address issues of equity, so they can actually address systemic racism as they interact with other systems, and they can address racist policies and practices and behaviors in the workplace.
So I currently work as a community organizer in Together, Colorado, which is a statewide faith-based community organization. And, you know, I find myself doing kind of like dual work. There's the work that we do to fight and to envision a future that doesn't exist right now. And then there's the work that you do to protect your folks from immediate threats, that kind of responding to immediate injustices. And in Together Colorado, we've had to kind of walk the line on doing both. I'm working with them on a 10-year criminal justice plan for the state of Colorado. And we're doing this by, you know, being in, first we're in community with each other, with people who had lived experiences in our criminal justice system and people who have a lot of self-interest to be at the table. And then we also, we do our research. We're finding out more and more about how mass incarceration exists here, the types of policies and structures that are used to create that. But then at the same time, when George Floyd was murdered and America was on fire, like the whole world stopped. I felt that when I went to Ferguson 6 years ago. And there's a moment where we got to respond to what's happening right now, and not just the what happened in Minneapolis and what continues to happen here in Denver, here in Aurora, but also, you know, responding to this pandemic has been a challenge. You know, we're looking at a mass eviction crisis, where one out of every 3 people in our state cannot afford to pay rent at this moment. So, you know, in the process of responding to stuff like that, that's how we, you know, combat this. But ultimately, none of this is possible without combating it together in community. Mm-hmm. Community is the source of our power. And regardless if we're responding to an immediate need or if we're planning for the future, we got to do it together.
That's a great response. And Kamau, I know you were on the front lines with a lot of the local protests in the wake of George Floyd's murder. Can you talk about that? There's been a lot written, a lot of differing stories about how those occurred, who was involved, who led the true protest. Can you dispel some of the rumors and what was your experience, in other words?
So that's a great question. So I want to acknowledge that, as you know, and as your listeners know, this movement did not start on May 25th, 2020. That there were already organizers on the ground putting in hard work, especially around the Elijah McClain case. There have been a group of especially Black women leading that fight since the moment Elijah McClain was murdered. And I do want to give a special shout out to Candace Bailey for leading that effort, especially working with the family of Elijah McClain, working on putting public pressure on, you know, on the Aurora PD, that was work already set in motion. So by the time that George Floyd and Breonna Taylor were murdered, there was already there was already a fight on the ground that now people can really, that more and more people plug into, especially in Aurora. What I had witnessed, which is something that I do want to talk about, especially in the earlier days of the protest, I had witnessed what people had considered to be violence and chaos and all this other stuff. But I want to set the record straight that is merely a response to violence and chaos. That the true violence and chaos comes from kneeling on a man's neck for 8.5 minutes. Comes from it comes from all the ways that people are disenfranchised and murdered in the streets. And so the response, although I had witnessed some broken windows, I had witnessed some folks getting angry in the streets, and I was angry too. I had witnessed an outpouring of grief and anger that was past due, way past due. And in response to that, police, especially Denver police and Aurora PD, initiated more violence in response to our grief. That for some reason, a broken window is so much more appalling than a broken life.
Right.
And so they lobbed tear gas canisters at us and shot rubber bullets into the crowd and all the stuff that we had witnessed. Even in Aurora, shortly after I left that protest, the Aurora PD came and really cracked down on people who were playing the violin.
Yeah, saw that.
That should be the standard of protest. Speaks to the type of brutality that we're facing today.
Goodness. Thank you. Yeah, I saw the violin playing people that came out in support of Elijah McClain. I'm saying his last name. I wept, literally. But thank you for sharing that. And the next question is for you, Rosemarie. Being a parent to adult children is different than parenting them when they're little. I'm finding that myself. So my daughter sits over there in Africa. What are some ways that you support Kamau in his efforts as an adult child?
I believe that every child must have a safe place to land at all times. And our family, our home is that safe place. We support our children in everything they do. I learned very early parenting adults is when your child's in trouble, close your mouth and open your arms.
I like that.
Yes, and that's what we do. And it's not always easy. When they're young, you kind of tell them what to do and they do it for the most part. But as they get older, they have grown folks problems and grown folks issues. And you don't always agree with the choices they make, but you always convey that you are loved beyond measure and there is nothing in this world that you can do to make me not love you. That I am going to be your biggest cheerleader at all times, and you can tell me anything and everything. I will be here for you. But I also believe that we have a responsibility to guide. The Bible says, train a child in the way he should grow, and when he gets old, he won't depart from it. It didn't say he wouldn't stray, mess up, go crazy.
Get lost, detour.
But it says it'll bring them back. They will come back, and I have all faith in that. But so I believe that we have to be the voice of conscience, and we sometimes have to remind them of who they are, because the world gives them so many negative messages, and everyone that they come in contact with will not have their best interest at heart. Mm-hmm. So it's up to us. So parenting adult children this is your choice. Let me tell you what I see so that you can make an informed choice and you won't wonder, Mom, why didn't you tell me? Mm-hmm. Dad, why didn't you tell me? So good or bad, I'm not your friend. I'm your mom, and I'm going to love you, but I'm also going to provide that guidance and as an adult, you do what you want to do with it, but at least you know.
Yeah, love it.
Very well said. And for you, Kamau, what are some of the ways you support your mom as her adult child?
So I think the value in having intergenerational freedom fighting is that I'm able to do and go places where my mom's not able to do or go, and vice versa. And so I love giving feedback about what I'm hearing on the ground, the ways through which that this movement is rapidly growing. And it's not that my mom doesn't or can't keep up, but there's a perspective that younger folks have that is extremely valuable from the position that my mother is in, and the angles that she's working from. So I love to support her through, giving her feedback, letting her know what's happening on the ground here. And then also I try to support her by listening. It's hard enough to have, I imagine it's hard enough to have a child out doing this freedom work and being worried about their safety and well-being already. That there were experiences that I've had that I'm sure probably could have given my mother a heart attack.
Yeah.
But with me listening and just not having to learn hard lessons twice. I want to make sure that, that my mother sleeps at night, knowing that I'm moving with common sense. And so those are the ways that I imagine that I like to help, but I don't know if that's up to me to decide how helpful those things have been.
Well, they have been very helpful. May I interject?
Yes.
I'll tell you, having this community organizer, activist son with feet on the ground at all times, yes, sometimes he gives me heart attacks, but I love the way he'll touch base. Mom, I'm on my way to the protest. You may have seen this happen, I'm okay. When he's out there and I'm not with him, and it's really interesting because this is the first time he's been home in protest that I didn't join him. Usually I'm there with him, but because of coronavirus, I can't take that chance.
Yeah.
But when he's out there, I am on everybody's live feed and we're in constant contact. And I can say, Kamau, they're putting on tear gas around the corner from where you are. Be careful, they might blast you right now. Mm-hmm. So we have that kind of two-way communication. And when he gets home, he tells me he's home. Even when I don't agree, I support him. There were, well, not rumors, but it was real that some white supremacists had infiltrated the protest, and that was terrifying for me. And but I never told him not to go because I raised him to be a warrior without fear. But in my heart, please don't go. But when he said to me, Mom, something doesn't feel right. I think I'm going to sit this one out. It was just amazing. So I've seen him evolve, and I think he understands that I will not sleep until I know he's okay. So he does a lot to spare me that trouble.
Wonderful.
Can I say one more thing about the way he's?
Of course, yeah.
I have a segment on 9 News. I'm considered their racial equity expert.
Yes.
And every week we discuss the segment and the ways that he talked about helping me from, in terms of the perspective of young people with his feet on the ground. That really does help to inform my segment because I'm able to give that perspective. So I have it from the 61-year-old woman, but I also have it from the activist who's that proximity and who's so close to it. So we talk through my segments. He gives me amazing feedback and it works out really well.
That's great, and congratulations on that. I've seen the segment. Very nice.
Thank you.
And I know you've talked a lot about, Rosemarie, the connection that has grown and the communication that you gained with your adult son, Kamau. With all that being said, is there anything, one of the greatest things you've learned from your son that you can speak on?
Oh, I have learned the value of restraint
Mm.
as you move forward. When, growing up, his birth name is Clarence Allen. When you graduate out of Jack and Jill, you are given your African name. It took his dad and I a year to name him.
Mm-hmm.
And Kamau means gentle warrior.
Oh,
He
okay.
embodies all of that. Most people don't know that I'm quite a firecracker. Quick temper, chop you off at the knees. But I have learned the power of restraint from him and loyalty and being very clear about what I'm doing and why. So many times people are guided by emotion. I've learned to be measured, but I've witnessed him in that way so naturally. So that has helped to inspire me. And his commitment to the cause, whatever it is he's working on, he is not going to stop or give up until it's completed.
Beautiful.
Thanks,
Thank
Mom.
you.
Love you.
Aww. Feels. That is beautiful. So, okay, Kamau, now it's your turn. What would you say is the greatest thing you've learned from your mom?
Oh, I've learned so many things. Because growing up, you learn lessons that you don't really think immediately apply to organizing and activism. But my mom has taught me everything that she knows from her experiences, her life growing up, and even just her life as an adult. She's taught me a lot of things around integrity, that a movement is as strong as the integrity of the people leading it.
Right.
And so the value of being forthcoming about your values and who you are. I've learned quite a bit about some cautionary tales around, you watch the way other people treat others, and that's how they're going to treat you. And so that's something that I think is directly applicable to organizing, whether if you're talking about watching your, in Together Colorado, we call them like opponents or your enemies, even watching the ways that your allies move. I've learned quite a bit about persistence, that you don't give up, you don't throw in the towel, you find new ways to push or new ways to get what you need to get done. One of the most valuable things that I've especially learned is navigating difficult spaces and relationships. And so that's especially important when you're talking about moving power, when you're talking about change. You have to learn how to both navigate and challenge difficult relationships. And so that's some, just a few of the things that I've learned. But most of all, to just be exactly who you are, that you are enough as you show up. And that when you try to be somebody else, you try to be like your idols, you're not going to be successful in what you do. And so let the organizing be authentic. Let your life be authentic, and everything else will flow from that.
Wonderful. That's wonderful. You done good, Rosemarie. That was and so for both of you, because changing the narrative is about changing the narrative on aging and ageism, I want you each to think about if you've ever experienced ageism and how has that presented itself in your life. So who wants to go first?
I'll go.
Okay.
I'm 61, and I have never knowingly, I don't think, have been a victim of ageism. I've had the fear of it. I was an older mom with Clarence. I had him when I was 35, as opposed to his sister when I had her when I was 24. Big difference.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my fears was being an old mom. And it's crazy now to think about it, but I really worked hard on staying young and taking care of myself because I never wanted him to be ashamed of me. You know how some people, oh, your mom is so old. I didn't want to be that mom. And I feared that, but it never came to pass. I've never felt that I was discriminated against because of my age or not listened to because of my age. I've never experienced it. I've seen it.
Yeah.
And I've seen it in the workplace. When I opened my nonprofit and hired people, I began to understand why some people engaged in that, because I hired older employees. When I say older, some a little younger than me, between 50 and 60. And health insurance was 2 or 3 times as much, and not as quick on the computers, but their wealth of knowledge and skill always compensated. But I thought, what if we were a different type of company and didn't want to pay this much for health insurance? What will happen to people as they get older and health insurance is more experience? So I've seen examples of how it could happen, but I've not personally been a victim of it.
That's great. That's great. Kamau, what about you in reverse? Have you ever been told, oh, you don't know if you have enough experience or if you're old enough?
Yeah, I've experienced that. I think the term ageism affects mostly older folks. So as far as I experience ageism, I have not. But due to me being young, I have experienced, some challenges to working in older spaces. And that kind of manifests in different ways. There are older folks who have been in this fight longer than I've been alive. Because of that, there's this idea that, I know best, and you should learn from me, and I do want to learn. But at the same time, young folks are leading this fight too. And so there's been some challenges to my own leadership as a young Black man. But there's also been kind of a conflict of ideas too, that older folks who remember fighting in the civil rights movement remember the ways through which they fought, and for a while had disagreed with the younger generation fighting in the Black Lives Matter, Black Liberation movement today. That there had been certain challenges on, the way that we communicate things, the way that we show up and present ourselves, even certain converging ideas, that there are some older folks who just do not understand that, or do not accept that this is, that we are intentional about centering, not just Black men, but Black women, Black LGBT, and to understand the convergence of these different identities and how they manifest in the criminal justice system and in Black life in general. And so there's some old school thinking that is constantly being challenged, or, some of our thinking is constantly being challenged. So I would say that's probably the way that question had manifested in my experience.
Okay, wonderful. Well, this represents the end of our planned questions. I just want to put it out there. Is there anything else you didn't get to share? Any other thoughts you want to share with us at this time?
Just one thing. I was a teacher before I had children, and I noticed that there were some parents who raised children that they didn't really like, that they didn't care to be around, and they were the first to drop their kids off and the last to pick them up. And as I watched this, and I was young, 19, 20, 21, and I decided way back then that I would raise children I like. And I've been really blessed, not only to love my children beyond measure, but to like them a whole heck of a lot. I am energized being in Kamau's presence. I love being around him and hanging out with him. And it's really something to not only love your child, but to like them. And if they weren't yours, you would seek them out anyway.
Love that. Love that. And Kamau, any other thoughts?
No, I just want to appreciate this call and what y'all are doing.
Yeah.
This is such a valuable moment in time.
Mhm.
With everything that's happening right now, we are called to be the best versions of ourselves. And I'm fortunate to have a mother that can help me to be the best version of myself. And so, um, you know, to the older folks in this fight, um, that's my call to action: help young people to be the best versions of themselves, and to listen, and kind of that balance of leadership and guidance, like, and as well as listening and being able to support. And so that's my call to action to older people.
Wonderful. Well, I certainly echo what you both said. Rosemarie, I also appreciate the opportunity to not only love, but I like my children. Daryn and I are just great friends, and I miss you dearly, but it's great to be able to work with you in this new way. My oldest, Angelle, likewise. That is a privilege, and not every parent has the ability to be friends with their adult children. And Kamau, I am not one to enjoy being in front of a camera, but you're right. This time calls for it, and so Daryn and I, as two introverts, are here with you, and we ourselves to make a platform for these kinds of conversations, because it's now or never. And this country is going in such a direction that if we don't seize these opportunities, and if we don't speak, and if we don't act, and if you don't go out there and do what you do, Kamau, because we can't. I'm in the same age group as your mom, and I am limited in what I can do in being out at protests. And so we appreciate all that you do. And we trust that it'll make a difference. And so with all that being said, we thank you for your time today. I know you're both very busy, and we look forward to airing this presentation on August 6th.